Something just happened in deep space that shouldn't be possible, and the people tracking it are no longer calling it random. 14 hours ago, NASA's Deep Space Network picked up a signal from an object known as 3I, Atlas, and the odds of what they detected happening naturally are so small they barely make sense. We're talking about a 0.00001% probability. At exactly 4:12 UTC, instruments locked onto a coherent electromagnetic pattern, precise, stable, and unmistakably structured. This wasn't noise. It wasn't static. It was something far more deliberate. Now, picture this clearly. About 240 million kilometers away, drifting through deep space, is what was supposed to be nothing more than an interstellar comet, a frozen fragment of ice and dust traveling silently through the void. But instead of behaving like every other comet we've ever studied, this object is emitting a low-frequency signal. And not just any signal. It's broadcasting at exactly 7.83 Hz. Not approximately, not fluctuating, exact. That number matters more than it might seem. If you've studied Earth's electromagnetic environment, you already know 7.83 Hz is not random. It's the fundamental frequency of the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic pulse generated by lightning activity between Earth's surface and the ionosphere. In simple terms, it's the planet's heartbeat, a unique, highly specific signature tied directly to Earth itself. And right now, something in deep space is replicating it perfectly. Let that settle in for a moment. The probability of a random interstellar object naturally producing that exact frequency is roughly 1 in 4.7 billion. That's not just unlikely, it's statistically absurd. You're far more likely to win the lottery while being struck by lightning than to witness something like this by chance. And yet, here we are, watching it happen in real time. When scientists examined the data more closely, the situation became even more unsettling. Comets don't have atmospheres. They don't generate lightning. They don't sustain electromagnetic systems capable of producing stable frequencies like this. They are, by all known physics, inert. But the telemetry coming in doesn't match that expectation. The signal is steady. The amplitude is consistent. The frequency does not drift. This isn't background noise. It's controlled. To understand how strange this is, imagine walking into a completely silent room and suddenly hearing your own heartbeat echo back at you from somewhere in the darkness, perfectly timed, perfectly synchronized. That's essentially what Earth is experiencing right now. We've always broadcast our electromagnetic signature into space. That's nothing new. But for the first time in history, something out there is reflecting it back with absolute precision. Even the astrophysics teams who specialize in unusual celestial behavior reacted immediately. At Harvard, where researchers have spent decades analyzing anomalies, this data triggered urgent classification protocols. When institutions at that level move quickly, it means the situation demands attention, and time is not on our side. In less than 48 hours, 3I, Atlas, will reach a critical point in its trajectory, aligning directly with some of the most sensitive radio telescopes on Earth. What makes this even more intriguing isn't just the frequency itself, it's the timing, the alignment, and the consistency of everything happening together. But before jumping to conclusions, we need to understand what this object actually is. 3I, Atlas was first discovered on August 12, 2025. It was classified as only the third known interstellar object to enter our solar system, following previous visitors that passed through without much incident. At first, astronomers treated it as just another rogue comet, a relic from a distant star system, traveling at an incredible speed of 87.63 kilometers per second. But there was one critical difference that quickly set it apart. It wasn't behaving like a comet at all. Instead of remaining electrically inactive, as expected in the vacuum of space, this object showed clear signs of electromagnetic activity. That alone raised questions. But what happened next turned those questions into something far more serious. On April 14, 2026, routine monitoring suddenly changed. NASA's Deep Space Network antenna in Australia detected an anomaly at exactly 9:14 UTC. The signal locked instantly at 7.83 Hz. Scientists needed confirmation, so within hours, independent systems from the European Space Agency verified the same data using entirely separate equipment. Then, to eliminate any chance of interference from Earth's atmosphere, observatories in Chile cross-checked the signal using different spectroscopic methods and reached the exact same conclusion. 3 independent systems, different methodologies, identical results. At that point, the margin of doubt was gone. What they were seeing was real, precise, and impossible to ignore. And that was only the first anomaly. What came next didn't just challenge existing models, it began to break them entirely. And if you think this first discovery was unsettling, what happened the very next day changed everything we thought we understood. So stay with me because this is where the story takes a turn no one was prepared for. What made the initial signal so shocking wasn't just its existence, it was how clean, how stable, and how intentional it appeared. But on April 15, 2026, the data revealed something far more difficult to explain, something that pushed this event from unlikely into completely uncharted territory. To understand what changed, you need to know one critical detail about the 7.83 Hz frequency. While it is Earth's fundamental electromagnetic resonance, it isn't perfectly constant. It fluctuates slightly throughout the day, influenced by global lightning activity, solar radiation, and atmospheric conditions. These changes are subtle, almost microscopic, but they are always present. It's a dynamic system, not a fixed tone. Now, here's where everything breaks down. The signal coming from 3I, Atlas, located 240 million kilometers away, wasn't just matching Earth's frequency, it was matching those tiny fluctuations in real time. Let that sink in. A distant object, with no known connection to Earth, was mirroring the chaotic, ever-changing electromagnetic behavior of our planet as it happened. Not delayed, not approximate, real time. The probability of that occurring naturally is essentially zero. This isn't like 2 clocks ticking at the same speed. This is like 2 completely separate storms forming identical lightning patterns down to the millisecond across unimaginable distances. The physics simply doesn't support it. At this point, scientists weren't just confused, they were running out of explanations. And then, just as researchers were trying to process this second anomaly, a third one appeared. On April 17th, at precisely 1842 UTC, the Hubble Space Telescope detected something unusual while observing the object's brightness. At first, it seemed like a minor variation, nothing uncommon when studying distant bodies. But when the data was analyzed more closely, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The object's coma, the faint cloud of dust surrounding it, was pulsing. Not randomly, not gradually. It was pulsing in perfect synchronization with the 7.83 Hz signal. In other words, the object wasn't just emitting a frequency, it was physically responding to it. This changes everything. What we're looking at now is an object converting electromagnetic energy into mechanical motion. Its structure is vibrating in time with a signal that matches Earth's electromagnetic pulse. First, it matched the frequency. Then it matched Earth's real-time fluctuations. Now, its physical form is moving in sync with that signal. Each step is more improbable than the last. At this stage, even the most cautious voices in the scientific community began to shift. Researchers who typically avoid speculation started acknowledging that this behavior doesn't fit within any known model of cometary physics. The way comets release gas and dust, known as outgassing, has been studied for decades. It follows predictable thermodynamic rules. This doesn't. Even experts at the highest levels, admitted that what they were observing defies the fundamental principles they rely on. And when those principles stop working, you're left with a question no one is comfortable asking: what exactly are we looking at? Because this no longer behaves like a passive object drifting through space, it behaves like a system. A system capable of maintaining what's known in physics as a phase lock, a perfect synchronization of frequency across vast distances. And maintaining that lock over 240 million kilometers introduces another problem entirely: motion. As 3I, Atlas travels through space at extreme speeds, any signal it emits should be distorted by the Doppler effect. The frequency should stretch, compress, and drift as the object moves relative to Earth. That's basic physics. But that's not what we're seeing. Instead, the signal arrives perfectly stable, with only a microscopic margin of error. That means something is correcting it at the source, actively compensating for motion to ensure the signal reaches Earth unchanged. Think about the level of precision required for that. Imagine throwing a ball from a moving train and calculating every variable: speed, wind resistance, rotation of the Earth so perfectly that it lands exactly on a coin miles away. Now scale that up to cosmic distances. That's the level of accuracy being recorded. And at this point, the implications become difficult to ignore. Over decades, NASA's planetary radar systems have tracked more than 12,000 objects, from near-Earth asteroids to distant interstellar visitors. Not one has ever demonstrated this level of electromagnetic coherence, let alone physical synchronization. This isn't just rare, it's unprecedented. Every model we use to understand objects like this assumes disorder, random motion, unpredictable behavior, natural variation. But what we're seeing here is the opposite. It's structured, organized, controlled. And then, on April 16th, something happened that forced scientists to reconsider everything. At exactly 22:14 UTC, the James Webb Space Telescope detected a sudden thermal spike on the object's surface. This wasn't gradual heating from the Sunday. It wasn't predicted. It wasn't explained by any existing model. The temperature increased by 42 degrees Kelvin in less than 3 minutes. For an object in deep space, that shouldn't be possible. Comets at that distance are expected to remain near absolute zero, frozen and inactive. A sudden, localized temperature jump of that magnitude suggests an internal process, something generating energy from within. But the most unsettling part wasn't the heat itself. It was what happened to the signal at the exact same moment. For days, the 7.83 Hz frequency had been a perfect mirror of Earth's electromagnetic pulse. But during the thermal spike, the signal changed. It didn't just reflect it inverted, it became the opposite phase of the original wave, like two sound waves canceling each other out. This is known as anti-resonance. And to produce that effect, across 240 million kilometers, timed precisely to interact with Earth's ionosphere, would require something extraordinary: real-time awareness of our planet's electromagnetic state. Nature doesn't do that. Natural systems are chaotic. They scatter energy. They don't organize it into precise, targeted interactions. But this is organized. And once you start looking at the numbers, the situation becomes even harder to dismiss. The probability of an interstellar object emitting a coherent signal is already low. The probability of it matching Earth's resonance is astronomically lower. Add real-time synchronization, physical vibration, and phase inversion, and the combined likelihood drops to something close to 1 in 4.8 trillion. At that point, coincidence is no longer a reasonable explanation. It's like dropping millions of puzzle pieces from the sky and watching them assemble perfectly before they hit the ground. It doesn't just challenge probability, it breaks it. And that's when the conversation shifted from "what is this?" to something far more serious. Because when an object begins organizing its energy output with this level of precision, it stops looking like a natural phenomenon. It starts looking like a system with a purpose. And what happened next made that possibility impossible to ignore. Because just when scientists thought they had reached the peak of this anomaly, the data revealed something even more disturbing, something that would trigger immediate global response. And you're about to see exactly why this situation escalated so quickly. By the time scientists reached this point, the data had already pushed the limits of what anyone thought possible. A distant object was matching Earth's electromagnetic frequency, mirroring its real-time fluctuations, physically vibrating in sync, and even inverting the signal during a sudden thermal spike. That alone was enough to challenge decades of established physics. But what came next didn't just challenge those models, it began to tear them apart. To understand how serious this became, we need to look at the mathematics behind it. Scientists started quantifying the probability of each anomaly occurring naturally. A comet emitting any kind of coherent radio signal? Already extremely unlikely. That same signal matching Earth's exact 7.83 Hz resonance? Practically impossible. Now add real-time synchronization, phase inversion, and mechanical response, and the numbers collapse into something absurd. The combined probability dropped to around 1 in 4.8 trillion. That's not just rare, that's beyond statistical relevance. At that scale, scientists stop using the word coincidence entirely. It no longer applies. To visualize it, imagine dropping 1 million puzzle pieces from an airplane and watching them assemble into a perfect image before they hit the ground. That's the level of precision we're talking about. And yet, the instruments weren't glitching. The data wasn't corrupted. Independent systems across the globe had already confirmed everything. So, the question shifted. Not, is this real, but what could possibly cause it? When researchers examined the situation from a thermodynamic perspective, things became even more troubling. The second law of thermodynamics states that systems naturally move from order to disorder, entropy increases, chaos grows over time. That principle governs everything from weather patterns to the behavior of galaxies. But 3I Atlas was doing the opposite. Instead of drifting into randomness, it was becoming more ordered, more precise, more structured with every new observation. Its energy output wasn't scattering, it was organizing itself into a pattern that matched Earth with increasing accuracy. That's not how natural systems behave. That's how controlled systems behave. At this stage, some scientists began to describe the object not as a comet, but as something closer to a resonance chamber, a structure capable of receiving, amplifying, and transmitting electromagnetic signals with extreme precision. And once that idea entered the discussion, it changed the entire framework of the investigation. Because if this object is acting like a receiver, then it's not just passively existing in space. It's interacting. And if it's interacting, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What is it interacting with, and why? Even the most conservative voices in the scientific community began to acknowledge that something about this object required reclassification. The director of the European Space Agency, known for taking a cautious approach to anomalies, publicly stated that the April 16th event alone justified immediate reevaluation. At the same time, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory made a decision that raised even more eyebrows. They redirected multiple orbital satellites not to track the object's trajectory, but to monitor a single radio frequency. That has never happened before. Think about that. Out of all the data streams available, all the objects in space, all the potential threats and points of interest, they focused resources specifically on this one signal. That decision tells you everything about how seriously this is being taken behind the scenes. And then came the internal memo. Released at 8:30 UTC the following day, NASA confirmed something highly unusual. The telemetry from 3I Atlas was no longer being treated as a passive astrophysical phenomenon. In other words, they were no longer assuming this was just a natural object behaving in unexpected ways. The consensus was shifting. Quietly, but unmistakably, the narrative was changing from observation to investigation. For those who have spent years studying cosmology and theoretical physics, this kind of shift doesn't happen easily. Scientists are trained to resist jumping to conclusions, to question extraordinary claims, and to demand overwhelming evidence before reconsidering established models. But here, the evidence was accumulating faster than anyone could process it. Every hour, the object moved closer to Earth, closing the distance by nearly 315,000 kilometers. Every hour, new data streams arrived, each one reinforcing the same unsettling pattern. The signal was real. The synchronization was real. The thermal spike was real, and none of it could be explained. At this point, the situation started to feel less like a scientific anomaly and more like a developing event, something active, something evolving. Because the object wasn't just behaving in a fixed, predictable way. It was changing over time, responding in ways that suggested adaptation. That's what made it so difficult to categorize. If it were purely natural, it should follow known laws. If it were artificial, it should display intentional patterns. But 3I, Atlas was doing both, and neither explanation fully accounted for what was being observed. So, scientists began considering a range of possibilities. One idea suggested that the object might be reflecting Earth's own electromagnetic emissions back at us like a mirror in deep space. But that theory struggled to explain the real-time synchronization and phase inversion. Reflection introduces delay and distortion. What we're seeing has neither. Another possibility involved unknown quantum effects interactions at a level of physics we don't yet fully understand. But even that explanation couldn't account for the structured, repeatable nature of the signal. Because randomness can produce strange results, but it doesn't produce consistent, mathematically precise patterns. And that brings us to the most unsettling possibility of all. What if this isn't a natural phenomenon at all? What if the object is designed to detect, match, and interact with electromagnetic signals, designed to maintain synchronization across vast distances, designed to adjust for motion, compensate for distortion, and even manipulate phase relationships in real time? In other words, designed to communicate. At this stage, no one was willing to say that publicly. Not yet. But behind closed doors, the conversation had already begun to shift in that direction. Because when an object behaves like a system, responds like a system, and organizes itself like a system, it forces a simple but uncomfortable question. What kind of system is it? And just when scientists thought they had reached the limit of how strange this could get, something happened that removed any remaining doubt that this situation was escalating rapidly. On April 18th, a new signal was detected, one that didn't just mirror Earth, didn't just synchronize, didn't just invert. This time, it encoded something unmistakable, something that cannot occur by chance, something that changed the entire conversation overnight. And what that signal contained is the reason global observatories immediately shifted into emergency mode, because once you see it, there's no going back. Up until this moment, everything we had seen could still, at least in theory, be forced into the edges of unknown physics. Unlikely, unexplained, even unsettling, but still within the realm of natural possibility if you stretch the models far enough. But on April 18th, 2026, that last layer of doubt disappeared. At exactly 11:04 UTC, a facility in Alaska detected something new. Not a fluctuation, not a distortion. Something entirely different, something that had never appeared in any prior dataset connected to 3I, Atlas. And the moment scientists saw it, they understood immediately that this was no longer just an anomaly, because this time the signal carried information. The object didn't just echo Earth's 7.83 Hz frequency. It didn't just mirror or invert it. It modified the signal by embedding a sequence directly into the carrier wave. And not just any sequence. Prime numbers. Clear, repeating, undeniable. Using an exact amplitude modulation shifting by precisely 0.05 microvolts, the signal began transmitting a pattern: 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Over and over again, with no deviation, no noise, no randomness. If you've studied mathematics at any level, you already know what that means. Prime numbers are not arbitrary. They are one of the most fundamental building blocks of mathematics, universal, consistent, and independent of language, culture, or biology. They are often considered the most basic form of structured, intelligent signaling, and they do not appear like this by accident. Let's be absolutely clear about what we're looking at. A frozen object, drifting through interstellar space, has now produced a mathematically precise sequence embedded in a controlled electromagnetic signal, perfectly synchronized to Earth's own planetary frequency. There is no natural process that can generate that combination. At this point, scientists were forced to confront three possibilities, each more disruptive than the last. The first option is that this is some kind of unknown natural phenomenon, a quantum-level interaction, or exotic physical process that we simply don't understand yet. But if that's true, then our entire framework for astrophysics is incomplete at a fundamental level. It would mean that nature is capable of organizing information in ways we've never observed before. The second possibility is that the signal is somehow a reflection of our own transmissions, Earth's radio leakage, bouncing off the object and returning to us in a distorted form. But that theory quickly breaks down under scrutiny. Reflection cannot generate new information. It cannot create prime number sequences that weren't already embedded in the original signal, and it certainly cannot maintain real-time synchronization with zero delay. Which leaves the third possibility, that the signal is intentional. That 3I, Atlas, is not a passive object, not a random fragment of ice, but something engineered, something designed to receive, process, and transmit information. In other words, a probe, a transceiver, a system built with purpose. That's the scenario no one wants to say out loud, because if it's true, then this is no longer a scientific curiosity. It's a moment that redefines human history, and the response from global institutions suggests they understand exactly how serious that possibility is.